Well, hello and welcome to the Affordable Housing Club. Today we are going to be looking at budgets and finance. This is somewhat of a complicated subject, and hope I can try to make it a little more understandable. So let me bring up my presentation. This is the fourth chapter in the development of the book. So why does money matter? Well, affordable housing is primarily a financial problem. It requires income, borrowing capacity, and ongoing costs. I feel you can use simple rules of thumb to becoming house poor. We'll talk about that later. And the goal here is to match housing choices to life stage and budget realities. So here are some affordability rules. The home price target should ideally be no more than 3 times the gross annual income. And that could be an individual or a family. And the lender's guideline says that housing costs should generally stay within about 30% of gross income, which includes principal, interest, and taxes. You should also budget a little extra if you're an owner of a home for maintenance and insurance, and it's often estimated as an additional allowance beyond mortgage. Renters should look at utilities when estimating affordability and have that covered. So let's start with the basics. You should know what you earn in gross and net and what you spend. It can be fixed and variable. You should track spending simply and consistently with a spreadsheet, some kind of app, or other tool, and look at basic categories. You understand basic finances. What are mortgage payments? What is interest, amortization, and taxes? Use the chapter's budgeting examples as a baseline to adapt to your situation. The budgets can change over time, obviously, as you go through life, and we'll look at kind of snapshots of the stages of life. And they evolve with education, career growth, family size, and retirement planning. Housing share may shift, but the don't overextend principle remains in all stages of life. You should use realistic assumptions for things like childcare, transportation, insurance, and don't forget savings. Here's a kind of a progression through life where we look at starting off in post-high school education. So you may have a part-time job or living with family or in school. So you may have an income of 20,000, in which case 40% is not unrealistic. As you get into early employment, you can start out with rent or shared ownership, and you have debt and transportation costs that are rising. If an income is 36,000, your housing should be around 35%. Once you get to 40, you may have some kids and a spouse, and you have to look at mortgage, utilities, and childcare as the dominant factors. Also, food and transportation start increasing. For an income of 80,000, 35% should be spent on housing. At mid 50s, it's probably a maximum income stage, and mortgage may be almost paid off, and kids may be on their own. And if you're making 135,000, you can probably get by with only spending under 30% on your housing. When you're 60, you could become an empty nester. You may be interested in downsizing, and you may be mortgage free, and you want to look at savings and insurance. So if you're at 70,000, again, your housing should be 30%. Once you are past 70, you may be looking at some kind of retirement facility. And assisted living, this can vary quite a bit. You may have now medical expenses, and the income is 45,000 plus, and you may not have any specific uh, housing costs other than the amounts paid in a retirement facility. So let's look at a sample budget for a young worker. They should keep rent at or below about 1/3 of income. Save at least a small amount consistently, even when starting out. This creates a habit that you can follow with through life. And within living expenses, food can be one of the largest categories, so plan on it. Here's a typical spreadsheet that you can develop on your own. It shows on the left the income, and that can include things like employment, investments, pensions, maybe a side hustle business. In this case, it's 36,000. Then you break your expenses down into these major categories. You can see on the pie chart that rent is about 1/3. So let's dive into the bottom green sector of living. And it shows that the big blue half on the right is food. And that is a concern for most people. But you shouldn't skimp on other things such as medical and dental costs. Now, as income grows, your spending priorities will shift. You may still be spending 1/3 on housing, but other categories can change. Transportation and food may become smaller percentages as income increases. You can use the extra margin to strengthen savings and reduce risk. Now, this could be you at 40, where housing is now kind of 40%, and you've got these other components that you have to take care of. But the time you get to mid 50s, it can look like this. You could be up to 135,000 in family income. Expenses, we show here that the housing is now a little less than a full third when you look at principal, interest, and taxes. You still have your housing costs of insurance and other costs, maintenance. And the living portion is about 1/3. Again, food now is not half, but more like 1/3 because you've got a greater income and feeding probably the same amount. Now, when you're into retirement, affordability doesn't stop. So you want to plan for your retirement housing and look at your ongoing costs to make sure your budget is sustainable. So you should aim to reduce fixed obligations such as debt before retirement where possible. And you build buffers for health, repairs, unexpected expenses. So let's look at finances. There are common misconceptions and mistruths, shall we say. You've heard the term a house is an investment. Well, that's debatable. Typically, over time, the house as an investment returns about a 1% return. But it is the next item for savings. That is true for homeowners. Now, should you pay off the mortgage before retirement? This is controversial. It depends on some factors, interest rates, your savings, risk tolerance, and whether you can afford to pay off your mortgage, but then use the equity to create a mortgage that you can invest and make more money than the cost of the mortgage. Now, borrow only to invest in appreciating assets. That's generally a good principle. In other words, a vehicle is usually not an appreciating asset. So you shouldn't borrow money for a vehicle. Save for a rainy day. Yes, that's a good principle. Diversify and don't put all your eggs in one basket. Yes, again. Some investments are risk-free. No, nothing is risk-free. Treat yourself to a new car as soon as you get a good job. Don't do it. Listen to Warren Buffett. Now, you should also plan for emergencies and have a financial safety net. So keep an emergency or rainy day fund for surprises. They're going to happen, no doubt about that. You can consider a home line of credit, sometimes called a HELOC, as a backup source of liquidity when appropriate. And you can monitor for unauthorized liens or financing arrangements tied to home services and equipment. There have been some scams where contractors sell you something and get you to sign a document that says they can put a lien on your house and they can put any amount on that they wish, even if it's a camera doorbell for $100, they can put a $20,000 lien on your property without informing you. And when you go to sell, you've got to pay off this debt. You should track your spending, but try to make it easy to verify. One way to do that is to match your budget categories to how you actually pay them. Some are paid by bank withdrawals, some credit cards, and some things are cash. So in some of your categories, you may have multiple payment methods, and you can plan for that. The goal here is to kind of quickly get a snapshot of whether you're on target or not on a monthly basis. You can look at a simple table format and list your major categories, and then add columns for the payment method, again, credit, bank, or cash. And then compare your monthly statements to your planned monthly totals to confirm that you are on track. Here's a little example in a tabular form. So here we have our categories for expenses, the annual costs, and then break those down into credit, bank, and cash. For example, your principal, interest, and taxes are usually paid through the bank to the mortgage company and the municipality where you have your property. Other things like housing can involve both credit card payments and bank payments. You know, looking at vehicles, sometimes you pay cash for different things, and you also will maybe have loans and bank payments. So when you sum those all up on an annual basis, you can then divide by 12 to look at monthly. And when your credit card bills come in, and you may have more than one credit card, but you look at them and are they in that, in this case, $4,000 range? As your bank balance debits typically around under 7,000, and are you spending the certain amount in cash? Thank you for attending this meeting. And if you want more videos on affordable housing, you can go to the YouTube link here or go to the website and send an email or make a phone call. Thank you for attending. And I will end the meeting now. Have a great day.